the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item E is the approval of the minutes of July 29th, 2024.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Jorgensen seconds. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of July 29th as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next order of business is to approve the minutes of August 19th. They have been presented to you and are in your packets.
Make motion?
Thank you, Commissioner Zundell. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 19th as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item G is building permits. Again, building permit report has been distributed and is in your packets.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Jorgensen seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the building permits as distributed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We're now on the consent agenda. We have items A through I to consider. It hasn't been distributed and they are in your packet.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as distributed. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Zundell seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as presented, items A through I. Is there any discussion?
Just one comment.
Commissioner Zundell.
Thank you for re-including a financial report. It was really helpful. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Any other discussion? I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We now move into the regular agenda. The first order of business is a public comment. Members of the public are allowed to speak for 2 minutes if they've signed up in advance. I have one person that has signed up in advance. Excuse me, it's Mr. Talixon, is that correct? Yes. Please come to the podium. State your name and address, please, and share with us your concerns.
Hi, my name is James Tullixon. My address is 213 9th and a half Avenue West in West Fargo. I wanted to make the council aware that there is a runoff on the bike path on running parallel Sheyenne Street under the I-94 overpass. And I sent some pictures of what that looked like. Water just vanishes pretty quickly on smooth, dry cement. But the runoff appears to be some kind of mud or algae. I don't know what it is. Just comes from the grass. About 10 feet from 15, 20 feet from where I took the photos, there's a storm drain of some kind that I think it's supposed to go to that. But as a result of it coming onto the bike path, I was injured the other day. This was August 18th, Sunday, August 18th. I was injured. My bike slipped out from under me going over one of these patches, and I broke my wrist and sustained some road rash on my left arm. 2 weeks later, my arm's healed up pretty well, but I'll have surgery to have a plate and screws put into my wrist tomorrow. So like I said, the photos are already included. If you go there and there is moisture collecting, should be easy enough to spot the runoff. It's pretty consistent. I've biked that path for about 2 years. And I think that someone is doing a decent job of cleaning that spot by going over it. When I returned a week later to check on the spot, it seemed like a lot of mud that had collected at the bottom of the tunnel had already been brushed away. However, the photos were taken the same day I visited, and will still show that the runoff is still coming onto the bike path. I'll be fine. I'll have that stuff put in, but if a kid or someone else was to slip on that, could have been a lot worse. So just wanted to make you aware.
So you're going under the underpass, under the Sheyenne Street? And that's where it's at? On the west side or east side?
The Sheyenne Street bike path runs north and south.
Oh, you're on the bike path. You're not on the underpass. Okay.
You're correct.
So I apologize to you. We did not get the photos. So if you'd resend them to...
Oh, okay. Maybe I sent them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please. But please continue.
So the bike path runs north and south and goes under the I-94 overpass. And while going under the I-94 overpass, it's sloped on either side, going down to a tunnel. Near the base of the tunnel, on the southmost side of that tunnel, is where you'll see the majority of that happen. Like I said, I've gone over that path a few years, and there's almost always some moisture and mud collected at the bottom, but whatever that, I don't know if it's mud or algae or what it is, but whatever it is, it's incredibly slippery. If you do catch it in the conditions where their water is collecting and you see that, it's very easy. Just the same day I took the photos, I just put my foot on the mud and just to test it, see if I was just being a baby. But no, it is quite slippery. I do think it's dangerous. And there is a drainage, some sort of storm drain or something very close that I think the moisture is supposed to deter to that. So I don't know why it's going onto the bike path. But.
Very good. Commissioners, you have any questions of the gentleman? Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Thank you for
Absolutely.
Mr. Scott, would you assign somebody to go out and inspect that, please?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone else that has signed up for public comment? I do not. All right, we move on to item number 2 is A24-24, Nelson Acres 5th Edition, consideration of a planned unit development, PUD, amendment regarding Shy West Garden Center. Mr. Nelson.
Good evening, President Dardis and Commissioners. I'm actually going to have Leslie McGillivray-Rivas, our senior planner, introduce this topic, but certainly am available for questions as you have them.
Good evening, Leslie, and welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners, Honorable Mayor. We'll take you on a brief overview, as I can, for this matter, the Shy West Plan Unit Development PUD Amendment, which we'll refer to as the PUD going forward, avoiding the confusion. So, brief history. The original PUD was approved in 2020, and in a bit of a departure from typical PUD amendments, it was approved not with a specific plan in mind, but a use. So the site itself meets the C light commercial and commercial standard, and also the corridor overlay district. The use that's specific to the site that was approved in 2020 was the greenhouse and plant nurseries. Now we run into a bit of a hiccup with the site. There was a zoning violation letter issued in May of 2020. And the reasons for that are that the umbrella under the corridor overlay district and the light commercial district with the greenhouse and nurseries didn't permit a few of the things that we found on sites. The first being a banquet and party event venue, which now occupies what was permitted as a former greenhouse structure, parking on a gravel unimproved surface, which is in the general location here, which also serves as a storage area for some mini bin bulk storage areas. And then we also had the presence of some illegal signage. Now, the illegal signage in that respect is something that was permitted on a temporary basis. However, it has reached its expiration point, and also the content of it, the structure of it itself, specific to the red truck, is not allowed per our zoning ordinance. So the staff went forward with the applicant, how do we resolve these issues to meet both the needs of the city and to also support a thriving business? So one of the other things that was found in our discussions with the applicant and through observation and through publicity on the site is there is another additional issue that has to speak to site capacity. With the generalization of the approval for the garden and nursery business, there are some what we would consider accessory uses. However, that's not very specifically defined in our zoning ordinance, nor is it defined in the structure of the PUD that was originally agreed on. So in specifically some of these circumstances, and I think the Mother's Day market and the Father's Day markets were, the Mother's Day one being the most highly concerning for a few reasons. It was found that this in addition to the landscape and greenhouse nursery use, in addition to the private rental venue business that was being occupied by the greenhouse structure, that there are market events occurring on site, which are kind of demonstrated here in this nice little graphic provided by the applicant's website, which show that they populate the site in the paved areas with market vendors that come on site and sort of occupy some of the usable parking areas and circulation areas. But they offer, as the list states, live music, food trucks, makers, artists, farmers, small businesses. And the market events themselves are stated to occur primarily in the months of July through September, and with the additional markets community events throughout the rest of the year. So once again, how do we resolve these highly programmed areas within this very constrained site? So the PUD amendment goals are the following. It is our goal to allow a private banquet, party, event venue on the subject property, to allow gravel parking and vehicular circulation on the subject property, and to allow illegal signage on the property to temporarily remain until permanent signage is installed. And I'll go a little bit more into detail. So as I stated before, the permitted use currently is a greenhouse and plant nursery. We are proposing to add the additional permitted use of a banquet, private banquet, party and event venue, and then also to define, as we don't really have one, of a permitted accessory uses. It's very loose in the ordinance. So in working with the applicant and understanding that business needs evolve, which is where we are today, we suggested the submission of 2 plans. A phase 1 plan, which memorializes everything that's on site today before you and captures the parking requirements for the existing and proposed uses, along with the other programming elements, but also a concept plan that could occur in future times when the business evolves. And the difference between these two are specific to the areas in the parking lot, here and here. At this time, I'll walk you through it very briefly. We have a little red truck that is part of the illegal signage that is going to be rectified. There is a lot of highly attractive landscaping along the perimeters of the site and some programming elements such as, for both recreation and ornament, a putting green. There is parking located in these areas currently and in the centrally located areas of the site which are paved. The shade structure captures, in the blue, captures the plant material as it's needed for shade structure. The formerly, almost coined a Prince phrase there, the area formerly known as a greenhouse, which is the private event space, is in this location, and the boutique retail establishment in this area with some accessory uses, a little coffee kiosk, standalone structure, and then 2 hoop houses. These areas and these hatches, they are what's known as mini bins. They're bulk storage materials, palletized goods, and so on and so forth. And the aspirations for phase 2 is that the hoop houses transition into a larger greenhouse structure that stands alone to replace these structures. Now, because of the programming and the parking calculation, you might be asking yourselves, how is this possible to permit? So it's a little bit of an addition and subtraction. So the phase 2 plan suggests that in order for a greenhouse to be added to the site, there has to be subtraction of the mini bins, and not only that, the surface needs to be paved as a condition of approval. So as I stated, the phase 1 plan, concept plan, and detailed development plan memorializes today. The phase 2 plan, concept plans, memorializes or shows the aspirations of what could be created in the future should all things fall into place.
Is there a defined timeline on that?
There is no defined, it would be business sensitive. So to accomplish these things, we have also included for your review in your packet would be a very highly detailed development agreement. So if you, in Exhibit A, the criteria dials in very specifically about certain elements of the site and how they are structured through the zoning standards. This, however, there are some additional level of detail that we feel is needed, just to keep things moving in a routine and orderly fashion. And so this is what is currently under your packet under the permitted uses: greenhouse and plant nursery, private banquet, party event venue. The use is restricted to the building labeled classroom and private rentals on the approved PUD concept plan, in addition to the accessory outdoor spaces adjacent to the building. And as you reviewed the packet, at the end of your packet, the applicant provided many of the pictures of the site showing how it's programmed and space is utilized. And once the greenhouse transitioned to a private rental space, our building inspections team had to look at that, and our building inspector determined that the greenhouse has an occupancy load of about 80 people. So with the discussion and agreement of the applicant, they've agreed to limit it to 50 occupants of the private rental venue. That number is important because it correlates to our calculation for parking, and so it doesn't become overcapacity on site. Now, at our Planning and Zoning Commission meeting a couple weeks ago, I want to just point this out to you. Staff had recommended a little bit of additional language, and I'll go into that further. We had proposed that the use is permitted during the months through July and April, and stated that no private banquet party event shall be allowed during the months of May through June unless the event is held during the hours the nursery and garden center is not open to the public and no other events are held. So a little bit of illumination on that. In our discussions with the applicant, we became aware that the heightened of the nursery landscape business has the greatest number of visitors, customers, occupants on site as a direct translation to the landscape and nursery business, okay? With the addition of markets and the private rental space, we felt that that was requiring a little bit higher level of control. The Planning and Zoning Commission did not agree. They thought that the applicant and the property owner themselves would have that ability to monitor their usage of the site, their ability to look at their sales numbers, and some of which they provided to us, which we haven't really analyzed in detail, but that they would be respecting that they would only rent the venue when it wasn't going to be in a conflict and over capacity the site. So that's one thing. So further in the development agreement, Exhibit A language is this: permitted accessory use is defined. So I don't know if I want to read this to you, and it's like death by PowerPoint here, but because the Planning and Zoning Commission struck the previous language, and because we don't really have vendors as we are defining them in the development agreement language, or accessory uses are loosely defined, we thought perhaps it would be wise to add additional language to this definition. So staff has defined some additional language for this one particular exhibit. And I think this is worth bearing to read a little bit just to get the nuances of it. But permitted accessory uses are defined. Accessory uses are permitted in conjunction with the allowed primary uses with the condition as follows. Accessory uses must meet all applicable standards for accessory use in accordance with Title IV of the city ordinances. So unless approved by the city via an applicable process such as approval of a special event permit, the hosting of third-party entities instead of vendors, including vendors, operators, farmers markets, food trucks, festivals, performers, and/or outside service providers of any type shall only be permissible as an accessory use under the following conditions. We are proposing no more than 3 additional third-party entities combined may be allowed on site. The total number of personnel for all third-party entities combined shall not exceed 5 individuals or shall not exceed half the number of on-site employees, whichever number is less. And it does require that all off-street parking stalls remain open and available for automobile parking. So again, it gets a little bit into a little bit more level of detail. It dials in the definitions so that there is a little bit more finer point on what our goals and objectives are in the development agreement and the approval process. And so based on everything that's been presented to you, the action being requested is to approve the PUD amendment, including the PUD agreement, PUD concept plans, and PUD detailed development plan. But before you get too comfortable, we just need to point this out to you. That whatever is happening on site and what we're approving here as a permitted and an accessory use, the city does have other mechanisms to further support the businesses and the community needs and the ability to attend events on site. So the criteria, the city does have special event permitting for things such as markets. There are several events that happen in our downtown Sheyenne Street that utilize this permitting process. So speaking specifically back to the development agreement, future events, including more than 3 outside vendors, will be required to seek special event permitting. So as you all know, that when a special event permit is applied for, it goes through a myriad of inter-city departments. They all are able to speak up for their concerns: fire safety, police, planning, public works. Do they need to close the street down? So there's a higher level of scrutiny. And that does not stop there. Sometimes special event permits trigger another need for another permit. Should there be alcohol at the private venue, that might be another level of review. If there's going to be a band or some potential for violating the noise ordinance, which is anything over 2 decibels, which I don't know about you, but I'm not quite sure I know what 2 decibels is, but I think we all need to find out. And when that is going to happen, then I think another level of permitting is required. So structurally, the city also does review any buildings that are being built. So the greenhouse that came in as a greenhouse and is now a private venue, it will need to go for a review back with our building inspections division to establish that new use and to meet that criteria. Just as there is an ambition for the hoop houses to someday in the future, as business needs require, to transition to a entire structure, the PUD agreement memorializes that the building inspections teams can't just authorize that carte blanche. They must review back when they send it to zoning for review. We would remind them of there is this condition, they can't be issued this permit until they've taken these other 2 steps. And then further, the signage, any attempt to put additional signage and rectify and permanentize the signage that's on site, that is a permit that is done through the zoning ordinance. So again, action being requested by the city, approve the PUD amendment, including the agreement, the concept plan and detailed development plan of phase 1, and the concept plan of phase 2. And I'm here for questions.
Commissioners, questions? Mr. Anderson?
First, a comment. I really appreciate this rundown. It's very succinct. Just very good detail. A lot to go through here. I think there's a lot of information here and kind of how things are presented, and within the agreement, seems like we've added parameters that both parties can at least work to adhere to. The question I have is, when we're looking at an event venue and there is a cap of 50 people, how is that enforced?
Good question. So we are looking at the applicant and the management of that facility, being as they have provided their contracts in the packet for your review, that they respect that cap. Now, as we know, code enforcement and any complaints are about anything in the city related to zoning or our laws are driven by the public. So should there be, and we're not saying there would be, but But should there be a raucous party that is noisy or starts exceeding the parking limits of the site, which will spill onto city streets, which we're now trying to avoid, like that would be one thing that would be observed to be enforced in that manner.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Leslie? Commissioner Sundell?
I have a question to taper off of what Commissioner Anderson had to say. The applicant submitted a letter, and one of the things that was included in there was the word violations in parentheses. So to me, that signals that I don't feel like the current violations are potentially being taken seriously. So if we approve this, is the only mechanism around it basically just denying special event permits? Because the event center would still exist. So if we change the amendment today, the event center would still exist. They would have to do special event permits. So if those started to become problematic, obviously there would be the loop around of denying special event permits. But the event center would still be there. So I guess I personally take issue with the fact that violations is in parentheses, and that does not speak or give me a lot of confidence that any of this is going to be taken seriously.
Point well taken. This isn't a public hearing, but I would suggest that the applicant is here, and as the author of that letter, perhaps that question is best directed to the applicant.
I do have a few questions for her. Can I ask you just a few other side zoning questions? So I appreciate that vendor got updated or kind of cleaned it up, but another potential concern that I see with this is, I will use the example of a coffee house. They have a coffee cart there. I believe that's owned by them. What happens if they just start owning a bunch of other side vendors that they own and they run with their employees? Does that count as a vendor against a vendor count? Because it's my understanding that that's probably would not be counted.
So it's a good question, isn't it? So we had considered in our review that we are considering the vendors that are on site are the ones that are there from 8 to 5, whether they're seasonal or part of that. Anytime another entity or outside, let's just say, small business comes on board, they would be considered a vendor.
But that's for third-party people. So
right.
let's say the owner, and I'm just going to come up with an outrageous example, starts a business for underwater basket weaving and decides I'm going to have an underwater basket weaving trailer, cart, whatever, and that becomes to some degree a permanent establishment of this. That's would not be counted as a vendor, correct? So like the coffee shop currently is not counted as a vendor. Anything that they owned or operated under their business name would not be considered a vendor. Would that be accurate?
I would say yes.
Okay. The other question that I have is, how long typically does a special event permit take to circulate within the city?
Well, we have to say a little bit of thanks to Sheyenne West for bringing this to our attention, because we've had a few internal conversations, and it's been a good exercise for us to look at our processes and our own website and our own trajectory, and I can tell you it's a little bumpy. But what I can share with you is there is a plan to review this, and it's going forward and might end up in the new year. We don't require by ordinance a special event permit currently. It's highly encouraged, and as a matter of events of such scale and magnitude, such as the ones that are downtown West Fargo, it's absolutely essential. So we're hoping that there's a little bit of common sense in the approach of applying for a special events permit. What it takes right now, we highly encourage it be applied for in no less than 30 days. That is just because of, from what I'm understanding with the conversations that I've had personally with our special events permitting, is that there are sometimes applications aren't completed correctly. They don't understand that they need to provide insurance. They haven't decided that they need to close streets. When are they going to, a myriad of details, and still once those details are nailed down, the circulation. So no less than 30 days, but it could be greater depending on the applicant's ability to provide all that information.
I see that there is an event scheduled there for September 14th, which is obviously less than 30 days away. Is there a special event permit started for that?
I'm not aware of that from the last 2 weeks. I would have to answer the applicant. The applicant can answer that question. But like I've said, it's not required at this point by ordinance, it's encouraged.
If we pass this, the way this is written today, though, it would be required, correct?
It would be encouraged, highly encouraged. It would be,
We could put it into the language
Yep.
that it is.
I thought it was required based on, so if there's anything more than 3 vendors, it would be required to submit a special event permit if we passed it as written today, correct?
that's the level of detail.
Correct. If the PUD was approved as written today, the PUD does include that requirement if they have any more than 3 off-site entities, third-party entities.
Third-party entities. Okay, so there would be that, but to our knowledge, there's nothing that's been submitted for the 14th.
Not to our knowledge.
Okay, so if we deny this today, what happens to all of the existing events that are supposed to go on through the end of the year?
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
So want
So,
to play paper, rock, scissors for it?
so that's one of the things that, staff would like to see out of this. So one of the positives of approving something is at least we can have something in writing that reduces some of the gray that currently exists. And so right now, our ordinance allows for accessory uses. Accessory uses has like a 1-sentence definition in our zoning code, which is basically anything customary and incidental and subordinate in nature to a primary use. And so that's where a lot of the challenge comes from, is between the applicant and staff and the city. There's a bit of disagreement in terms of what constitutes an accessory use, an allowable accessory use. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with this PUD agreement, is to put some parameters on accessory uses so that it's more clear to everybody what is and is not acceptable as an accessory use. And so right now that, the 3 third-party entities doesn't exist anywhere in ordinance. And so we're trying to carve that out specifically for this property.
And maybe I should ask more, what about the events that are scheduled in the event center that I would say, in my lens anyways, would be a clear non-greenhouse related thing? So grad parties, bridal showers, anything that's currently in that Ivy Room, what happens to that?
Yep. So right now, the renting out of the Ivy Room as an event center is not something that the PUD currently allows.
Correct,
So that would be a violation.
correct. So any additional things after this would technically
Correct.
be a violation on top of that.
So as Leslie noted, we did send a notice of violation letter with some specific dates for compliance. The applicant did submit this PUD amendment in order to try and address some of the violations that were cited. And so we did, basically put a hold on any enforcement action in order for this application to proceed through the process, in order for you all to make a decision. If you deny it today, we would pick up where we left off in terms of bringing forward enforcement action.
And then are there any other requirements to apply for a special event permit? Like, do they need to have a liquor license? Do they have to have anything else other than just be a business that's hosting an event to apply for a special event permit?
I would say that it's unique to the event that they're planning. So we would have to scale for it. So
Sure.
so it's kind of an encompassing question you're asking. And so without the details of every event, that's.
Like, if there's not gonna be liquor there, they wouldn't have to have a liquor license from the vendor of someone applying. If there's not gonna be food there, we wouldn't have to.
If there is someone who, in the private event rental area, who is going to be providing alcohol, serving alcohol, we have encouraged that to be addressed. And as the property owner, it is their responsibility to be good citizens and community members and respect the needs of the public that way.
Sure. And then one more question.
Sure.
This is the last one, sorry, and perhaps Mr. Hansen can help with this, but where do we stand with the preliminary work agreement for the traffic study?
So thank you for bringing that up. I didn't suggest that. That is what I would call an ancillary action. So that was applied for back in November of this last year. We've gone through a few committees of study. We've gone through, I can't remember what it's called, but it is currently on hold pending the resolution of this, because our ordinance does state that it cannot move forward while there's a zoning violation on the books. So it's a bit of a trajectory. So once if this gets approved, and then the zoning violation gets moved forward, and then I want to remind us where we're at with the.
Stepping to the microphone is Mr. Dan Hansen, our West Fargo City Engineer. Mr. Hansen, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner President and Commissioners. Right now, where it sits is there is a preliminary work agreement that is to hire a consultant to analyze 3 different ways for traffic to enter the site. Primarily, 2 of the ways are an allowed U-turn on 40th by extending a lane on the south side of 40th, as well as the Planning Commission recommended that we analyze a roundabout at the intersection of 4th and 40th. That was talked at the Planning Commission. It was brought forth to the Commission. Where it lies right now is, I believe, in May. We sent, May 15th, I think, was when we sent over to the applicant that application for the preliminary work agreement. That would come with them submitting the application for that, as well as submitting $20,000, which is the amount that the consultant has given us in a task order to analyze those three things. It's my understanding that the applicant wants to see resolution in what we're talking about today prior to submitting that, but in just speaking for myself, I consider that a mutually exclusive event from what we're talking about personally, because what we're talking about there is access to the site and the safety of the traveling public being able to access the site. We're not talking about issuing a permit to the application, to the applicant for this. This would be a public improvement that she would be a petitioner and also the developer of that project. So in my opinion, we would be able to still receive that preliminary work agreement and do the study. Now, the study would come back with an analysis and recommendation that we would bring back to the Commission for approval, and obviously we would go over the results of that study with the applicant as far as being able to proceed with that.
But as it sets, the study could happen tomorrow, in theory, on our end.
Yeah, as soon as the
The
escrow
agreement
account
gets
is
signed,
created.
the 20,000 gets deposited, that traffic study could start happening tomorrow.
Correct, because that's not starting any physical work out there. It's just the study to
It's just the study.
see what the recommendation is from the traffic experts on that. So.
All right.
And then I do have a couple questions for Ms. Callis. I'm not sure if now you want to do it. or
We're
anyone
going to
else.
stay with our staff first. Commissioner Olson.
Leslie, you brought up a point, or else it was Aaron, about what the primary purpose of the business is. My understanding, it's a greenhouse nursery, right, of this site.
One of them, yes.
One of them?
One of them now, with the permitted use,
The permitted use is a
Right now.
greenhouse nursery as
Correct.
of today.
correct.
So explain to me how a graduation party or a bridal shower is an accessory to the primary business of a nursery greenhouse. I don't see one. I don't see how, I don't
Well-
see the correlation between the two, because if it would
But
be
I think the thing-
something with a plant, then I understand
I'll
it.
let Aaron
But
give
it's
the nuts
not.
and bolts,
So
but I'll
I
also,
don't see how that all works.
but also remember, and maybe it's not totally identified in there, there's a lot of classroom programming also within that area that is what we would consider in keeping with the landscape and nursery. They have a very robust young youth education program and all of that. But that is the nature of identifying the additional private venue as being a separate permitted use. So it's not an accessory use
That's what was
underneath.
described to us just recently as an
It's-
accessory
Correct.
to the primary.
But, right, so what we're proposing is that it is approved as two separate permitted uses. Do you have anything to add?
Anyone else?
I think, yeah, just to,
So, the issues at hand that brought this to the forefront was that there were violations, 4 violations, is that correct? 3 violations, my apologies. 3 violations. And the amendment is to change the ordinances and the city policies in order for them to be in compliance. Is that correct?
specifically for this PUD, it wouldn't change any city
Step a little
ordinances.
closer to the microphone, please, Aaron.
It wouldn't change any ordinances, it would be specific to this PUD.
But we still have 3 violations. Have they been addressed? How, in years past, nothing else would be considered unless the violations had been rectified. Have the 3 violations been cleaned up?
As of today, they have not been cleaned up.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? Questions for Mr. Andrew, or Nelson, excuse me? And Leslie, anything? Leslie, I struggle with your hyphenated
McGillivray
name.
Rivas.
I apologize, so I'm
Sorry.
calling you Leslie. My apologies. Any other questions for staff? Okay,
I just have one
Please.
just additional suggestion. Should it be necessary, we do realize that this is a lot of information to throw at you, and it's also it can be challenging to review, evaluate, and adopt new language that we're proposing as staff to an ordinance, or to reinstate that which the Planning and Zoning Commission chose to remove. So please remember that as we're talking about this and others come to speak before you, that if this becomes cumbersome, there is always the option to continue this, to allow staff to work further with the applicant and amongst ourselves to get to a resolution for any agreeable language to move the application forward. That's all I have.
thank you. Commissioners, any
Yes, I do
questions
have-
after that statement?
I do have one.
Commissioner Olson?
I see that we had sent out notices to property owners within 150 feet of this proposed site. There's nobody that actually lives within 150 feet. So I don't understand, I know it's our bare bones minimum of what we have to do. Nelson Acres is a lot larger. People who were impacted by the Mother's Day thing live a lot farther away than 150 feet. So I don't know, to me, we should have sent it out to the entire neighborhood. Everybody within maybe a quarter mile or more of who could be impacted by a special event. And one thing, that should be done before we move forward at all. Because I remember I was sitting here when we had the discussion originally on this, and we were getting people that lived just about a half a mile away that were concerned about the noise from trucks backing up and all the beeping noises and the dust and all of that kind of stuff from the greenhouse. And they're concerned about us changing the zoning from residential to commercial, because then we couldn't control whatever went there. It could be a nightclub, it could be a
That was
drugstore
one.
or
Nightclub.
something, anything. So we agreed to go with the PUD, and the applicants did too. And here we are today.
Again, Commissioners, do you have any additional questions of our staff? Commissioner Zendel, you have something additional?
Always. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm obviously new here. I went back and I watched all of the meetings because I wanted to make sure that I was caught up and had a lot of information to make decisions. And I would say when I listened to the meeting on February 4th, where at least you two were at, it seemed very clear to me, at least, that your intent was definitely to have this as a greenhouse. And it was very clear that the residents that showed up that day, one of the concerns, like you mentioned, was with the zoning and going from, rural residential, residential to light commercial. And to me, the reality is an event center has different problems than a greenhouse. And I think even when the greenhouse was approved, there's been differences. Even at the time, I have it 12 minutes and 44 seconds in, there wasn't even going to be any large commercial stockpiles. Those were going to be at an alternate location. There was going to be small dump trucks, basically, and not semis. Talking about the noise being kept to a minimum and just very light retail boutique. I wasn't there, but the impression that I very much got is I'm not sure this PUD would have went forward at all had we been talking about event center things and traffics, given the resident concerns at that meeting. I think there's been a long history of some tension between the neighborhood and the business, and I can totally understand that. I went and looked at those Nelson Acres roads, and there are permanent indents in the gravel of people doing U-turns, basically on 4th and 42nd. And I know that traffic study would hopefully, kind of solve something for that. But I think even with the traffic study and even with an access point, there's not a solution currently for parking and the amount of people that are going to be there. I have been invited to graduation parties, and I know there are graduation parties where you may have 48 chairs in the building, but there are 200 people getting invited. And I struggle with having any way to control the amount of traffic which seems to be the very big frustrating point for the people that live in the neighborhood, the residents that are trying to access the recycling area and everything like that. So I think that's where my current conflict rubbed is. I mean, even with the access, and I know that's to some degree a completely different, thing, but I even have written down 2829. Commissioner Thorstad at the time was even asking about access. And Mr. Scott specifically said in that meeting, this will never be a full access turn. I would never want this to be a full access turn. And I mentioned it to the applicant after the planning and zoning meeting. We're willing to kind of work through some of that. And I feel like 4 years later, we're still at the same spot where we're arguing about a left turn. And so I don't know, when I look at some of this, if I feel like this covers all the things that need to be covered. Personally, I feel like there should be a little more detail, but where I'm at with it from the event center perspective, the capacity, in my opinion, is not there.
Thank you. Anything additional? Roy?
I
Commissioner
have a
Jordan.
question for probably Mr. Nelson. On like the parking spaces, is that like a national standard, one parking spot per X amount of people?
So the required parking comes from what was on the books in 2020 when this was originally approved. When it comes to our parking ordinances, it's kind of a combination of lots of different things. One of the standards that are oftentimes used is the, gonna blank on the acronym, or the ITE, thank you. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has a parking generation manual that has a number of different uses listed, and basically it just takes surveys from around the country in terms of how many cars are frequenting businesses of different types. Oftentimes it's just based on past experiences as well as kind of a comparison of comparable communities and what their parking numbers are. So it is subjective. It's not a fine science by any means. And so
Well, I'm just looking at it, that, you get one parking spot per employee, but then for a private banquet, 50 people, you get 10. Well, I think the overflow is gonna fill out into the streets and possibly into the recycling center and stuff, like it has.
yeah.
And then we get,
And that 1 per 10 people capacity is consistent with any kind of large-scale gathering facility in town. And so that is, any reception hall, any church or religious building
and
has
like you
the
say,
same.
graduations, you come and go, and, you want all your friends and family there, it's understood.
Yep. I will note too, though, with a PUD, the commission is allowed to, you can add specific requirements as well. And so if parking is one of those concerns, the parking can be adjusted as part of a PUD. Not to muddy the waters further, but.
Anything additional, commissioners? For staff? I too would like to thank and compliment the amount of work that you put into this. Thank you for that. Our consideration is an up or down on the amendment to the PUD on the 5th edition, or as Leslie has considered, or asked us to possibly consider, we could reconsider this or table this for some additional conversation in detail. So I stand here at the pleasure of the commission. What do you want? What do you want to do?
I'm going to make the motion that we approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion fails due to the lack of a second. Thank you, Commissioner Anderson, for trying to move this conversation forward. Is there a second?
Are there portions of this that people agree upon? Like, I am fairly agreeable to waiting on the different phases. For phase 1, phase 2, I'm agreeable to the signage. Where I get lost is the events.
There's no timetable.
That's what I struggle with. There's no timetable for phase 2. And the other thing is that, in my opinion, the violations have to be corrected before we go forward. It just sets the precedence of how we're going to deal with it if another issue should come up. So, in my opinion, those violations that are sitting presently have to be corrected before we move forward, for my consideration, for my to vote favorably on this.
So when we do assess violations to businesses, is there a timetable set to them to rectify the violation?
Mr. Shockley, is any of that delineated out in some of the ordinances or policies that we have?
Thank you, Mr. Commission President, members of the West Fargo Commission. It really depends upon the nature of the violation. There are different violations that have specific timelines set forth in the ordinances. Typically, code enforcement will give a certain amount of time in which the business has to come into compliance before the city takes additional action, usually 30 days or 45 or something like that. The city ordinances do provide that if the applicant can provide some sort of assurances that the violations would be taken care of, it's what I call the safe harbor, that has to be some proof. Usually if it's like a violation of contract, if they can show they have the money in the account to finish it, something like that. And going back to what the staff had indicated, if there is a compromise position by the city commission, we could certainly take that back and redraft the documents and then have final approval by the commission so that you know exactly what you're voting on, if that's the direction of the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Additional questions for Mr. Shockley?
Do we know how quickly the rock bins could be moved? Is there any idea how? I know we had that business dependent, but if we put an end date on it?
That is entirely up to the applicant at this point to find a location that's permitted where it's to be relocated. And thank you for calling me up again, because we did have an allowance of 2 years for compliance for the signage, so that one does have some parameters. And speaking specifically to the rock bins themselves, we really considered that was, in our opinion, a reasonable request to leave them status quo because of the context of the neighborhood, being that they're surrounded by gravel roads. And so so they're at this fine line between what's rural and what's urban. So understanding it, if they wish to move forward, that's a bit of the carrot and the stick. If you wish to move forward to further improvements, that's the time you're going to remove the rock bins, pave the lot entirely, and then you're able to move forward should you wish to. So. But the signage could be rectified in very short order. It's by itself.
May I offer a middle ground?
Please, Commissioner Zundell.
What if I made a motion to approve the first two portions, to address the signage and to address the rock bins, adding a end date to the rock bins specifically so that, we could call rock bins perhaps by the beginning of next season, empty out whatever's in there now, get it paved before we're starting to do things, and have the carrot of that be special event permitting necessary starting now, basically, to cover having a special event permit, to have kind of some of that defined. And then to me, I think reconsideration of talking about events in the actual event center that are not specifically classes for kids on gardening or, things like that, where we have a solution to this traffic. Because ultimately with the event center, the problem for everybody, I think, is the access, the traffic, the parking. So until we have a traffic study where we can say, okay, we can fix the left turn in and we're not going to destroy county roads, or not county roads, I'm sorry, township roads into Nelson Acres, we have a better idea of what that looks like.
Just
Mr.
a question
Olson?
for you. What will the removal of the rock bins do to correct the violation of the surface, the parking surface?
It doesn't.
If we gave them until the beginning of, call it May 1st, to have it paved, removed and paved by May 1st, empty them out this season.
I also see their point though too. They're not gonna spend the money to do that, and then we deny this, and they just spent their hard-earned money. So it's kinda, we're a ways apart. We
It's
need,
all or nothing.
yeah, we need,
And that's the point that I was trying to make when I talk about the violations that are existing have to be corrected because they have not been corrected. When did we start this? What year?
2020.
So this has gone on for years, and they have not been corrected. And so what ability do we have to enforce going forward? So I think that the horse has to be before the cart, and I really do believe that the things that are in violation have to be rectified before we can move forward. That's the only leverage that the city of West Fargo has in making sure that we can work together and be compliant on what they need and what the city needs.
So what would you say if a big box store came in and built on a green space, but they only paved a half of their parking lot? What would you do then? And they say, well, we'll do it when our budget is right, but they never give us a timetable. I mean, it's just a wild, crazy example, but that's basically what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do it when we feel it's right.
With all due respect, a big box store would never do that.
I know that, but I couldn't think of anything else on the spur of the moment. So.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just trying, my goal is to some degree find a solution for staff so that they know how to move forward, a solution for having some parameters around some of the events, because I know there are many scheduled, but I guess the events would just be, in theory, continued violations if we do nothing. I think personally, if they want to park on gravel for the rest of the season, like that doesn't grind my gears personally. If there's an end date, I understand wanting to have an end date. I think that that's important. And perhaps even having some things defined about if it's not done by then.
When you say park on gravel, you mean within their property?
Yeah.
Or within?
Because they would have space, correct? If the bins were removed, there would be enough gravel parking to be compliant. Is that correct?
So to be, they're not currently in violation of parking. Parking's not one of the issues.
Isn't the paved parking the problem?
The issue is that parking and vehicular circulation is required to be paved.
Okay, so
and a portion of it is
there's enough
gravel.
parking with gravel, it would just have to be paved to be compliant.
There's enough parking.
Okay.
Yeah, they're compliant either way, whether it's paved or not. The violation aspect of it is that it's required to be paved. It can't be gravel, if that makes sense. So with phase one, the phase one plan on the left-hand side of your screen here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but they would be making some minor adjustments to their site to add parking spaces with that. Those parking spaces would be on gravel, but they would be required to install like concrete bumper guards, to demarcate where those parking spaces are.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Would the commission consider asking that planning and zoning take this back? And at the next commission meeting, you've heard all of the concerns that we've expressed here. I'm sure that the owners will have rebuttals or different ideas on how they might address some of the issues that we have here, and come back at the next September meeting, 16th, I believe it is. Is that correct? That's one suggestion. But I'd certainly stand for any other motions that anybody would like to put forward.
So if we did that, would you want to extend their violation? Because it sounds like we've kind of given them permission to carry on, and we're not going to push anything until we make a decision. So if we kick the can to September 16th, that's going to cover the September 14th event, I presume? And then I would say I would make a request that anything that's planned after that, the special event permitting process would start regardless of what maybe kind of happens, so we can run through that and flush out some of the problems I'm sure will arise as we work through it.
Commissioner Olson.
I have a question for Aaron and Leslie. Do we have a special events permit application or anything like that? Any ordinance that stipulates what
Yes,
a
we
special
do have a
event is?
special events permitting process. It's actually run by our communications team, and it's under the purview of our police department. So there is an online form, and there's quite a bit of drop-down data that can be entered, so it does exist. It's not easy to
Said it was
find.
Strongly encouraged.
It's strongly encouraged.
How
It's,
about required?
it's,
Do we have language that says it is required to have a special event permit?
I think we'll let our city administrators speak to that.
Well, there is, yes, thank you, Commissioners. There is a special events permit section within our alcohol ordinances. And so that is a special event permit relating to alcohol. And that's where some of these terminologies can get confusing in a hurry. The police department manages what's called a street closure permit. And that, I don't believe, is anywhere in an ordinance. But the special event permit, that term is in our Chapter 10 alcohol ordinances.
As is our noise ordinance, allows people to apply to exceed the noise ordinance limits.
I have another question.
Ms. Zundell?
It's my understanding they have land to the west as well, that I think they're setting some stuff on. Is it an option for some of these special events to have parking there and have like a shuttle of some sort, just so we're keeping the traffic off Fourth and out of the recycling center? Is that, I mean,
The short answer is no.
okay,
And there's much more information pertaining to that site, so I would strongly suggest that you don't tie the two together.
okay, got it.
The zoning doesn't allow it at the present time.
Right. But I'll also caution you, as long as when you continue to a date certain, our submittal of items is going to be the end of this week. So will we have enough time to?
Again, please, Leslie?
The submittal of our items for the 16th is actually this Friday. Being that it's already Tuesday, it does give us a little bit of a constraint of time to work through these additional details.
That being said, are you suggesting the first week in October?
I am sure that the applicant would prefer them to be done by the 16th. I'm suggesting that we might not have the ability to comply
We'd have
with
to leave
staff.
that to your discretion. That shouldn't be a commission decision. It's whether or not you, as staff and meeting with the owners, could clean that up. So
Okay,
we'd have to follow your lead on that.
thank you.
Anything else? This is an actionable item. How would we like to proceed? Commissioner Olson?
We've already acted on it.
We have denied it, denied it. Is there any other action?
Did we technically deny it, or, because he made a motion, we just didn't act on it, so
It's
we need a
A lack of
motion
a second is a no vote. It was denied.
to approve it, okay.
Yes.
So.
But we can give verbal instructions to our staff that if all the conversation we've been having here, if we want them to continue having a dialogue with the ownership,
Wouldn't it be up to the ownership to come back to us then, to come in with an amended?
either
Agreement?
or.
Either or?
Certainly. Mr. Shockley, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. President. The ordinance is pretty specific with PODs. The commission it's required under the ordinance, the commission has three choices. You can deny it, you can approve it, or you can approve with changes or recommendations. So if the desire is to have staff continue working on it, the best option would be just have a motion to table it. Or if there's a desire to deny it, you should have a formal motion to deny it, since the motion to approve didn't pass.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. So we're looking at a motion to table or a motion to deny.
I move to deny.
Commissioner Olson moves to deny. Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion fails due to a second. I'll make a motion to table it till, at the earliest convenience of staff, to be worked out with the owners.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Dardis made the motion, Jorgensen made the second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Vote passes on a 4-to-1 vote. Item number 3 is the Growth Area Master Plan Project Introduction and Discussion. We call on again Mr. Aaron Nelson, our Planning and Zoning Director. Welcome back.
Thank you. Sure, go ahead. All right. So item 3, proposed growth area master plan introduction and discussion is an informational and discussion item. And so we're not looking for any action tonight, but instead we want to formally introduce a proposed planning project to take place in 2025, and then to solicit any feedback and thoughts from the commission that you may have tonight or in the coming weeks. So tonight I'll just take a few minutes to provide some background context for the proposed project here and to walk through the project summary included in your meeting packet, including some potential next steps, and then finally to answer any questions and take any feedback that you might have. So just to kind of jump right into it here, the proposed growth area master plan was identified as a midterm priority project within the planning needs assessment that was conducted in 2022, 2023. The intent is to develop a growth area master plan prior to completion of the FM diversion project, and then the associated remapping of fastest walls of the city's growth area out of the floodplain, which would in turn reduce significant barriers to development within our extraterritorial area specifically. So in short, we want to make sure the city is well positioned to handle the next wave of growth before it happens. And to that end, included on the slide in front of you here, as well as in the project summary, the main purpose of the project is to produce a master plan to strategically guide the city's future development in an orderly and coordinated manner that is both fiscally sustainable and consistent with the community's vision for the future of West Fargo. And so that's kind of the overarching purpose. And then, to that purpose, we are proposing 4 different project objectives here. So the first objective is to better understand future growth demand and the long-term fiscal implications of today's growth decisions. Each one of these objectives has kind of a brief tagline, and so the tagline here is to expand the knowledge base. And so this may include such things as comparison of differing growth scenarios, analysis of various funding mechanisms for funding growth, better understanding of the timing and location of future growth demands, which could be specific to some of the city's capital improvement investments over time. Objective number 2 is to establish and map out a phased plan for the city's physical growth based on the city's comprehensive plan. So the tagline here is to flesh out the vision. The comprehensive plan is very broad in nature and does not go into great depth in any one topic. And so the intent here is to kind of take the next step, if you will, kind of launching off where the West Fargo 2.0 comprehensive plan leaves off in some of the more growth-related aspects. So this could include such things as consolidation of existing plans into one cohesive plan for growth, and then coordinating and phasing of capital improvements and service expansions with development. So that includes things like coordinating streets, utilities, emergency service expansion, as well as coordination with schools, parks, and et cetera, along with anticipated growth. This would also potentially include development of future land use maps and master street plans to help guide future development. The West Fargo 2.0 comprehensive plan was unique in a lot of ways. One of those ways being that it went away from a more traditional future land use component, and so there's not a lot in the comprehensive plan that speaks to future land use, and so it's kind of vague in terms of what property owners and developers can expect in terms of future development opportunities. Objective number 3 is to collaboratively manage growth decisions amongst dispersed stakeholder entities. This is taglined as to improve collaboration, and this includes public participation. So there would be a robust public participation plan associated with this project, as well as collaboration with partner entities to ensure growth decisions are coordinated with each other. That would include things like the school district, park district, as well as collaboration with landowners and developers in terms of their vision for tracts of land within the city's future growth areas. And then lastly, objective 4 would be to develop the tools and action steps necessary for managing future growth. And so the tagline here is to establish the tools. This would include development of the decision-making framework needed to guide development decisions so that when questions come before you all, you have the tools necessary and the kind of answers to questions that you might have when considering various development-related decisions. This would also include development of a set of recommendations and action steps to better prepare the city for future growth. So identifying what those gaps are and then plotting a course for filling those gaps, again, prior to anticipated second wave of development activity. Also included in the project summary are a number of issues that have been identified by staff and others. There's a quick summary included on the slide here, kind of the four maybe key issues. The first is related to infrastructure capacity and challenges. This is probably more specific to some of our sanitary sewer infrastructure, some of the pinch points, and we're at capacity in a number of areas. And so in order for the city to continue to grow, we'll need to figure out answers to some of those questions. And I know Public Works and Engineering are working on some of those questions right now, but those also need to tie into future street capital improvement plans as we coordinate those with MetroCog and others, as well as future land use decisions. The second point, it's a nice segue into land use and development policy uncertainty. As I mentioned, the West Fargo 2.0 plan is unique in that it does not include a future land use plan, and so the idea would be that through this process we would create a future land use plan that would be tied to a number of other kind of phased infrastructure maps and different things that would all be cohesive across the board. Third, fiscal sustainability and development costs. We all know special assessments is always an issue and something that maybe warrants some additional thought and better, at least an opportunity for investigation in terms of what alternatives might be out there to help fund the cost of development. Are there lessons out there that we can learn from past decisions? Is there anything that we could do differently to make sure that the city is developing in a fiscally sustainable manner in the long term? And then lastly, coordination and consensus among stakeholders. Again, this kind of speaks to the need for more collaboration, not that it's not happening today, but certainly just recognizing that any decision that a school district makes in terms of a new school has a ripple effect of development and kind of capital improvement decisions that need to be accounted for. And so it's an opportunity to bring all partners together to make sure everybody's on the same page. Another section included in the project overview is just some scope of work elements. Due to the scope and technical nature of the project, we would be looking to contract with a multidisciplinary project team to lead this effort. And so these scope of work elements are something that would potentially be kind of fleshed out and included in a request for proposals type document. So we would be looking for that team to kind of manage themselves, to develop that public and stakeholder participation plan for throughout the life of the project. Plan focus areas, those are kind of loosely tied back to those project objectives. The plan development, so actually drafting of the document, and then bringing that through the approval and adoption process, making sure that there's plenty of opportunity for city leadership, the city commission, planning and zoning commission, and other stakeholders to weigh in throughout the process. And then lastly, plan implementation. Ideally, this would be an actionable plan. There would be some recommendations that come out of this that would provide us with a roadmap, at least for the next year or so, that we'd be able to work on in order to, again, be prepared for future development. Next slide here is just touching on the study area here. The primary focus, as we see it today, would be focused on the periphery of the city limits. So that does include areas outside as well as inside of the current corporate limits. This includes the city lagoon properties. Obviously, those are in the process of being decommissioned, and there's still some perhaps unanswered questions in terms of the potential for that site. How can the city best utilize that property, capitalize on kind of a maybe once in a generation opportunity for that much land within the current city limits. This would also be primarily focused on areas within the FM diversion alignment, but may also include areas along the I-94 corridor there. And then the secondary focus area is in blue. Those would include kind of all other areas outside of the primary focus area that are within the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction. As far as anticipated timeline, right now, Q3 of 2024, we're just in the project scoping and initiation approval process. So this is the first time that we're formally kind of introducing this to the full City Commission. We had a similar conversation with the Planning and Zoning Commission just a couple of weeks ago. We'll have a similar commission with the Economic Development Advisory Committee here later this week. As we continue to gather input and further refine the project overview here, we'll eventually be looking to bring this to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation, and then bring that recommendation to the City Commission to actually initiate this project. So potentially, within the next meeting or two of the City Commission, we might be circling back to you with a request to move forward with this project for 2025. I'll just quickly note that this was a project identified within the 2024 capital improvement plan. It was identified on the 2025 project list there, in addition to being identified again on that planning needs assessment a couple of years ago. So with that, most of the actual work would take place in 2025. You can anticipate something like this would probably take a year, if not a little bit longer, to complete from start to finish. So looking at, potentially Q2 of 2026 for final completion of that project. So with that, some next steps again here. We're just looking for some initial feedback from you all here today. Any comments, questions you might have. If you think of anything, you don't have to ask them or provide comment here today. Feel free to reach out directly to me or other staff within the next couple of weeks with anything you might think of related to this proposal. We'll continue soliciting feedback from others, and then, like I said, we'll be circling back to you within the next probably meeting or two with some more formal requests for action. So that's what I've got in terms of a high-level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions and to kind of hear any comments or thoughts that you all have.
Would you remind the public on your CIP line item for the consultant, what that dollar amount is for 2025?
Yep, I believe it's $300,000 is what we had in the CIP.
Thank you. You have on one of your slides, it talks about public feedback and the like. Could you go into that briefly, how one would anticipate doing that? There you go, right there.
Yep.
Public and stakeholder participation, how you would engage the public on this dialogue. Like you said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our community with all the growth due to the completion of the diversion in 2026, 2027.
Yep, certainly. So as I mentioned, the collaboration was one of those 4 objectives. So you can maybe think of it as one of the 4 main pillars of what we're looking to do here is to have broad collaboration and input. And so specifically to that point, within the scope of work elements that we have laid out here, this would be something that we would be looking to kind of identify and highlight within a request for proposals. And so making it clear to any project team looking to submit a proposal on this project that we'll need to see a robust public and stakeholder participation plan. And so that would be something that the consultant team would come and propose in terms of what their approach would be to public and stakeholder participation. And that's where, a lot of these, that's why they're multidisciplinary in nature, is they do have, communication experts on their team that, through their expertise, they kind of come with a robust kind of menu of options, whether it's, an online website where people can interact and participate throughout the project, whether it's specific public input meetings at specific sites, focus groups, many other kind of aspects to that. But the maybe some key points to that is it would be a comprehensive plan, and so it wouldn't just be waiting till the very end of this project to kind of hear feedback at the very end. We would want to have a very robust input phase at the very beginning of this to hear feedback, your comments. We'll lay out as best we can what we feel the issues are, but certainly it's anticipated there might be some additional issues or questions that are discovered upon the initial public and stakeholder feedback that we would get as part of this project.
One of the discussion items that a developer has posed to me is there's really kind of 3 options. There's obviously many more than that. One of the possibilities is with regard to the lagoon property that the city of West Fargo sell it. Okay. Number 2, the city of West Fargo retains that and we try and develop it ourselves, which I don't think we have the capacity and manpower for that. Or number 3, you send out an RFP, you choose a developer with whatever their plan might be for that land use, and you move forward that way. So we're going to have some decisions coming forward as to how we are, I personally believe that probably item number 3, an RFP and some type of a community partnership with a developer would be the best route to go. But That'll be up to the five of us up here is how we move forward with that. And the guidance of Mr. Shockley, of course. Any questions, additional questions for Mr. Nelson? Are you looking for an action item here or just for information?
Just for information tonight, and then, like I said, if you guys think of anything else that you want to add, feel free to reach out to me directly. We're trying to, it's a draft document right now, and so, you know, we'll certainly incorporate any feedback or comments we get before we kind of finalize this up and bring it forward for action.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
Yep, Mr. Jorgensen. We're going to take a break for 5 minutes. Thank you. We stand adjourned. We'd welcome him. Mr. Scott, anything to add? Okay. We'll ask for your comments after that.
Yep, I'm here for questions, but I'll let Brian Stavinger here with I-Bailey take.
Good evening, sir, and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. We were together via Zoom at the end of March because of a storm that hit. So some of you have, at least within the last 6 months, received the 2022 presentation. This will be very similar, going over 2023. So it's challenging to remember that we are in 2024. You're working very hard on the 2025 budget, and we're looking back to 2023. So I'll try to remind you every once in a while, but that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So this is the executive summary, which is a high-level summarized version of the full audit, which I believe all of you have. It's now over 80 pages. We don't go through that in detail. You're more than welcome to read it. I finally came to the realization that not everyone is like me and absolutely loves numbers. So it can be tough to get through at times, but there's a lot of good information in there. One of the drawbacks from that audit report, it's really only having 1 year's worth of information in it. Kind of tough to see where the city's been, what it's gone through. So this executive summary in most instances, one gives you graphs, so give you some good color, which I also enjoy, but really upwards of 10 years of information. So you can really see some good historical results. I'll buzz through this fairly quick, but be sure to pause periodically for any questions or added comments. And then at the very end, do the same. So this is really just a quick reminder that the financial statement audit is not representative of a forensic examination or fraud. This audit is intended by standard to really make sure that what is being reported internally by the city and its finance department is accurate, following all the right accounting rules. There is a component of fraud that we have to consider, but it's not designed to detect and find fraud. So this is really just a good reminder of that as we go through this audit. Results and findings. There's certain objectives that we are required to follow. Really, any external audit that any audit firm or individual does has to follow these standards, so it's really not any different. Really trying to be standardized across any and all audits. And then what we do is we obtain, through audit work and evidence, reasonable assurance. We don't get that absolute assurance, which really means we're not looking at things 100%. We're looking at things based on risk, higher risk areas where there's the potential of misstatements or errors. We're going to spend more time in those, and then ultimately we're just going to be sampling a bunch of the activity. So a few reminders on these first few slides. The audit opinion for 2023, a clean, unmodified audit opinion. That's what you have historically received, what you continue to receive through 2023. Really, it means that management is doing three things: following the right accounting rules, everything is materially accurate or fairly presented, and then that full audit report has all the required disclosures. So management is responsible for that. We go through our procedures and then give you our opinion, which is that clean, unmodified opinion. There was a new standard implemented in 2023. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but if you do get into reading that full audit report, you'll see some terminology around what's referred to as GASB 96. GASB stands for Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which is a nationwide standard-setting body for all local governments and the reporting that they do. We're just rolling into now triple digits, so there's 100 and 101, but most recently that was implemented was GASB 96. Has to do with any technology arrangements that you may have and just putting those on the books as both an asset and a liability. We also, in 2023, performed really in conjunction with the main audit, a federal audit or audit of the federal funds. About $1.9 million was expended in 2023. Most of that ARPA funds also received a clean, unmodified opinion within that audit. One more slide, I think, and then we'll get into some graphs, but I'll pause after this slide. So as you go through the audit, or as we go through the audit, and I reported to you two different opinions that are both clean, unmodified opinions, you can still also have findings, and there are findings. These are detailed out towards the back or the end of the audit report. These are all repeat findings from 2022. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but I would say there was some pretty high expectations that we would likely run into these things again, just with all the turnover, open positions, kind of repeated itself in 2023. A couple of these we already know have been addressed and are no longer an issue. And we will anticipate those going away in 2024, and then we'll just continue to monitor the other ones and really work closely with the finance department to help eliminate those in the future. So before we get into the numbers and the graphs, any questions on the results and findings of the audit?
No, sir.
Okay, cash. Cash is very important, so we like to provide a graph of what does the city have for cash and investments for the last 10 years. This is broken down into two different categories. The two different really types, high-level types of funds that are reported in a city's audit report. Proprietary, which is mainly water, sewer, and garbage, and then really everything else is in the blue, which is general fund, capital projects, debt service, and any other miscellaneous funds. So really you can see for the last 6 years, it's going to fluctuate a little bit depending on the activity around year end, but overall very consistent. And at the end of 2023, over $100 million in cash and investments across all those various activities and funds. So what's important to look at and why we provide this next graph is to say, okay, if you have that much in cash and investments, is that good? Is that bad? Really, it's taking a look at, well, what do you have for that cash on hand compared to your liabilities or what you owe? There's normal monthly accounts payable, there's payroll payable, there's current portion or upcoming long-term debt payments. So what we do is we convert that cash graph into a liquidity ratio, which says for every dollar that you have in those liabilities, how much do you have on hand? So really at a minimum, you want to be above that 1.00. 1.00 would indicate that for a dollar in liability, you have a dollar in cash. So essentially no real wiggle room. You can see you've been well above that the last 4 years. A little bit of growth in 2023, but sitting at about 4.0 liquidity ratio, which is a good, strong ratio to have, good adequate cash on hand to pay your future obligations. Questions on cash, liquidity? Otherwise, I'll keep cruising through. All right, these next group of slides will all be dedicated to the general fund, the main operating fund of the city. A lot of information on this graph, but really it's just a realization of what kind of revenues are being collected as well as transfers in from other funds. Periodically, there's transfers in from other funds, but as you can see there, taxes, licenses and permits, intergovernmental, all other miscellaneous, which is interest and some other items. Good steady growth in those revenues and transfers into the general fund. The next slide is very similar, except this is expenditures or dollars that are spent out of the general fund within a few different categories, as well as any transfers out. Much like transfers in, periodically there are transfers out. There were none in 2023, but you can kind of see the pattern here. What I would say is most important is analyzing your fund balance, or really your reserves at the end of the year. There's a few different reasons, and there's more than three, but these are the three main reasons why it's important to have it. There's also, because it's governmental accounting, it's not just one category, there's multiple categories. What we focus on is what's called unassigned, or the far right, which is really, there's no restrictions, it's your true reserves, your true rainy day fund. These are fund balances for the last 10 years. You can see they dipped down a little bit in 2022, and then for 2023, for the most part, maintained themselves. There was a slight deficit spend in the general fund in 2023, which was actually budgeted for, and you actually came in a little bit better than what you had budgeted for. So for the most part, fairly flat from 2022 to 2023. Much like liquidity ratio, it's important to understand, well, how does that compare to the budget? The budget, generally speaking, and is the case here, as the city grows, the budget generally is going to grow. So you want to take a look at, what is that fund balance as a percentage of your budget? So you can see it dipped in 2022. Just from historical levels, it's still at a good, strong level, and a little bit of a slight decrease again in 2023. Really anticipated through looking at the budget that would happen, but still a good, strong reserve in your general fund. Really what that means is you've got approximately 8 months worth in your reserves. If you took in no more revenue into that general fund, you could operate as is for about 8 months. Generally speaking, there's a national organization that puts out kind of some guidelines, not requirements, just kind of recommendations. Hey, no less than 15% in your general fund balance reserve. And really they recommend, At the city and county level, usually a much higher reserve, usually around 50%. So you are more than above of those recommended guidelines and still have a good, strong fund balance. Before we move on to a few other funds, any questions up to this point?
Please. Commissioner Zundell has one.
Do we know what caused the dip between 2021 and 2022, where we went from 145 to 81? I know we had a planned deficit spend last year, but was that one also a planned?
So I know the big thing in 2022 was a pretty significant transfer out to Capital Projects Fund, really to kind of plan for ongoing significant capital projects. So I had mentioned, periodically there's transfers in, transfers out. A lot of times, what the city of West Fargo has done is when there is some surplus in the general fund, transfer it over to capital projects, utilize it going forward, and really be able to minimize debt service obligations. So that's really the main reason.
Mr. Scott?
If I recall, I believe one of those specific capital projects were related to the new fire headquarters.
Oh,
It was
sure.
a $4.5 to $5 million transfer. Yep, so.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Capital Projects Fund. We were just talking about it. These are expenditures out of the Capital Projects Fund. So there are capital projects, capital outlay that are done in the general fund, very minimal. Most of them are run through these capital projects funds. So really just giving you a guideline for really where that level of spending has been the last 10 years. So as the city's grown, so have capital outlay or capital expenditures, really for the last 3 years, fairly consistent there, right around 30 million or just under 30 million annually. And then that capital projects fund, this is the ending fund balance, which this fluctuates. You can see for 7 out of the 10 years, it was at a deficit balance. 3 out of the 10, it was at a positive balance, a fairly small one in comparison to the activity there. That really has to do just with the timing of funding. A lot of times, and it's the city's really, it's intentional to spend the money and then essentially get reimbursed through debt proceeds. Depending on the timing of all of that, that's why that fund balance can be negative. We monitor that to make sure it doesn't go too low. We began working with the city in 2019, so those earlier years, we were not here to provide input, and I'm not exactly sure what happened, but you can see really over the last 6 years, fairly consistent to be just above or just below, again, really depending on the timing, but nothing to be alarmed of there. Water and Sewer Fund. Water and Sewer Fund is currently combined for audit purposes. I know there's been discussion, it even probably started 3 years ago, internally of maybe we should separate those out for audit purposes. It was a little bit more work than the capacity allowed with the finance department. There were priorities, and this definitely went down the priority list. So we've continued to just report them together, but there is kind of a plan in place to continue those discussions to break those out for audit purposes, because I know internally it's tracked separately and budgeted for and all of that. So we'll continue to work on that, but for now they're combined. Really the important thing here, this is essentially an income statement. Depreciation is very significant in these funds with the infrastructure and in the investments there. So depreciation, which is over $10 million on an annual basis in these two funds, really does distort it a little bit. From a cash basis standpoint, which that's not reflected in anywhere in this presentation, but if you look at the full audit report, there's a cash flow statement that really shows that from an operating standpoint, it's generating, both funds are generating positive cash flow. The depreciation really does distort it a little bit, so making sure you understand that. But if you take out that depreciation, which is a non-cash accounting entry, that's this line right here, and you can see it's right above 0, so operating at a good positive result. Depreciation has to be accounted for, but just making sure you understand that. Net position continues to be very strong. Most of this, and net position is really reserves in these funds. Most of these funds' reserves or net position are related to infrastructure. I think it's almost 97%. And then the rest would be cash and investments. So it is a very large number, over $300 million. That just represents the amount of investment in infrastructure in water and sewer that's taken place. Year-end cash and investments continues to be steady, if not grow a little bit of growth in 2023. So overall, good, strong results, operating-wise, and at the end of the year in those funds. Questions before we go to the garbage fund?
Anyone? Commissioner Zundell?
Mr. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but our sewer fund is kind of the one that we're concerned about. So some of these numbers look a little distorted based on the fact that they're combined. Would that be inaccurate?
Yes, Commissioner, that's accurate, yes.
Okay.
The financial report that was in the consent agenda
Has the
has
differences.
those two funds separated out, yep, and you
Okay.
can see where the cash balance is. sitting.
And there has been some discussion about separating them.
Yes.
For the audit.
And then my other question would be, when you're looking at the depreciation in some of these funds, I know a lot of our infrastructure is obviously aging probably at a more exponential rate than a linear rate. Do we expect to kind of continue to see that depreciation head more aggressively negative? I mean, there's probably nothing we can really do about a lot of that, I suppose, just based
Yeah,
on the age
that's
of the
accurate,
city.
yep.
Okay. So nothing to be concerned about, in your opinion,
Nope.
when you compare it to the.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
All right, garbage fund.
On what schedule is, say, a water project we're on?
What's that?
What schedule is the depreciation at? 25 years, 30 years?
It's probably anywhere from 30 to 50 years.
Thank you.
Garbage fund operating statement, which really the goal here, there's not much, there's a little bit of depreciation, but not nearly as impactful as water and sewer funds. So we didn't break that out, but really you want to target to be break even, at or near break even. You don't necessarily need to make a whole bunch of money. You also don't really want to lose a whole bunch of money on a consistent basis. So you can see this has been at a steady decline from an operating income into an operating loss situation. I'm sure it's being addressed, or I know it's being addressed, but you really just kind of want to hover around that break-even point in the garbage fund, which I'm sure you're working towards in this next upcoming budget. Net position of the garbage fund had some pretty significant growth beginning in 2019, and then for the most part has remained steady. A little bit of decline over the last few years as you've had some operating losses, but still a good strong net position. And here's your cash and investment balance in that fund, which really is representative of also that over the last 4 years or so, some operating losses, which is just slowly ate into your cash balance, but still good positive cash balance in that fund. So a final opportunity for questions related to the 2023 audit, maybe something I talked about or something I didn't. Willing to take those before we move on.
Any questions, Commissioner Sundell?
The findings that you had at the beginning, which ones of those do you know offhand are repeats from last year?
Every single one of them.
Every single one of them? And then out of those, which ones have we already addressed?
So the bank reconciliation, timeliness of bank reconciliations has been addressed. It was actually addressed during 2023, probably last quarter of 2023. But knowing the situation and how the year went, we wanted to double check a few of those earlier months. So we did note like June's took about 2 months to get it done. Typically should take 15 days, 30 days at the most following month end. We did note by year end that was being done timely. And then the very last finding was really a lack of a procurement policy that covered all federal guidelines. That was instituted in January of this year. So just after 2023 year end. So those two have been addressed already. And like I said, we continue to work with the finance department and Dustin on helping mitigate and eliminate, hopefully, the remainder.
And then out of those financial statement findings, are any of them fairly common or consistent that you see? I know previously with other audits, I feel like there's always going to be a finding, which means you're doing your job. But are any of these pretty common for city government?
Yeah, we certainly don't go into audits looking for findings, but there are very common findings. The first three are very common.
Very common findings. Okay.
Having the auditors assist with preparation of the financial statements, so that full audit report that you have in front of you, a lot of cities ask us to help with that. We, by standard, have to report that as a finding. I always like to say it's just being transparent. We're involved in that. Management is reviewing that. It's their numbers, but we just help prepare it. Through the last few audit cycles, we have assisted with making some year-end adjustments. really dealing with the situation of the turnover and lack of knowledge. But that is fairly common that we'll have some sort of adjustment. There's a lot going on. There's enough day-to-day that the finance department has to deal with. Inevitably, sometimes they're gonna miss something. In this case, it was more about they just didn't have the personnel behind them, so we helped with that. And segregation of duties is another one. I think the city is gonna have the opportunity to eliminate that one pretty quick once you get the finance director on board and really analyze all the different transactions and make sure different people are looking at different things. But that is a common one, especially in smaller local governments and municipalities.
And then can you explain the activities allowed or unallowed for the federal award one?
So that one had to do with, so there was payroll being allocated to the ARPA federal program. And that was done through, we'll call it a journal entry or an adjustment. And really there was just a lack of documentation to be provided to us, that was properly reviewed, approved before it was done. As we tested it, we didn't notice any non-compliance. It was really just having, it kind of goes back to that segregation of duties, having adequate personnel involved, reviewing, approving, and so that should be a fairly easy fix.
Personnel and paper trail?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Anything else?
Anything else? Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dustin, how do you make the audit available to the public if they want to look at it?
Thank you, Commissioner President Ardis. Well, answer that question. Rachel actually has already published it to our website, so it is available to the public right now.
Perfect answer. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for the softball. And I do want to just throw out there, Brian hinted at it, but you know, naturally we went through a lot of change and turnover, and can't thank our finance team enough for reining the department in, doing that over the past several months now, really without a director. So again, can't thank our finance team enough to keep us in line and get us to where we are today.
I'd like, you know, when you look at audited statements, 4 out of those 6 items, I was in business for 48 years. Every year you get the same 4, every year. I mean, when you have an organization, when it's like separation of duties, you know, whoever picks up the mail shouldn't do the deposits, you know, all of those simple type of things. So,
And you got to remember last year, Emily, for a few months there, was doing a lot of the finance department work as our executive assistant. And so, again, a big thank you to Emily. And it just, again, can't be thankful enough for our staff to put in that extra effort and keep us where we are.
absolutely. Anything else, Mr. Scott, on the audit? You good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Any questions, Commissioners, of Mr. Scott? Good, then we move on to item number 5. Project number 9038, Bank Stabilization, Dan Hansen, City Engineer. Approve a task order to study a potential Cheyenne River realignment. Mr. Hansen.
Thank you, Commissioner, President Ardis, and Commissioners. What I'm here to talk to you about tonight is something that we've been taking a look at for a little while now. There's an area of town near what I call 622 Morrison Street, which is a property that was purchased to eventually install a stormwater lift station on. There's an existing private development of multifamily homes that are on basically a peninsula just north of 7th. And there is some sloughing of the river that is taking place. Working with our emergency management director, Pierre Freeman, he was able to obtain a $100,000 grant from the state to do some preliminary engineering work to take a look at that site. And that work was, the work that has been done so far was to hire Braun Intertech to do a bank stabilization study, which is contained within the packet. And then also, in addition to that, we also have done some river bottom topography, and then also Braun Intertech took a look and did some borings on the site where the future lift station is going to go. The CIP does list the future lift station project as basically a $12 million project. That was a project that was identified in the core area study. Basically, all of the storm sewer in the core area was designed to the design standards of the current times, which is undersized for current design standards. So as we move forward in the core area with reconstructs and things of that nature, we are going to be looking at increasing the size of the storm sewer. That's going to bring more water to a point, and we want to install a lift station, but we also want to do that without degrading the river any further than it currently has been going. I will jump down and let's zoom out here just a little bit. So here's 7th. This is the location of the lift station that is intended to be placed at some point. That lift station will be a main lift station that takes much of the flow from the core area and delivers it into the river. Currently, these 3 multifamily structures, as well as this garage here, have been, are on that peninsula, and this exhibit that we have right here actually shows the degradation of and the sloughing of the riverbanks over time. I'll zoom in on the legend here. Basically, if you go from orange in 2019 to purple in 2022, you can see how the riverbank has moved back in different places where it's been sloughing. Here's one place that it's more pronounced, but basically everywhere you take a look on this, the riverbank is closer to those buildings than it was in 2019. So in the Braun Intertech report, it did talk about when we install it, one option that could be done would be to sheet pile around much of this oxbow area of the river. We also want to take a look because in discussions with Pierre, there really isn't like the funding that we used for previous buyouts for the hazard mitigation grants and things of that nature. That money is not really available for these buyouts. One of the ideas that we had taken a look at, potentially looking at, and that's going to be enclosed into the proposed work, is taking a look to see what would happen if we were to actually realign the river at this point. The intent would be at some point in time, we would be, after we do some more stormwater modeling, to submit for a BRIC grant for the installation of this expensive stormwater lift station. By doing that, if we were to find that the costs of actually rerouting the river at this point is cheaper than actually sheet piling around the entire area, that would be something that we could include in that BRIC grant, and by doing that, potentially could get money to buy these homeowners out. Now, again, the homeowners would need to pretty much vote to be bought out. We're not talking of a taking here. Don't assume that that's what we're talking about, but we do want to take a look and analyze utilizing that $100,000 grant that we do have from the state. What would this look like? How much would that cost? Is it cheaper than sheet piling around it? How can we keep water flowing through the river? What would that do to the stability of the channels? And how would it look? That basically summarizes the amount of work that would be contained within the report, as long as some environmental and permitting work that we would want to get a heads up on what type of permitting would we need to go through to do this type of work here. So included in the packet is a task order for more engineering. I did it at the advice of Pierre. I did do a solicitation of engineering firms to do this work after talking to several different engineering firms. More Engineering was the engineering firm that chose to go with. Frankly, the other two that I had talked to said that they would be more suited to do the work because of their history of the area. They've already analyzed that lift station. They have a better idea of what the flows are going to be in their previous historical work in the area. So that was enough for basically an informal solicitation of quotes. That satisfied Pierre. He did talk to the state as well, that would satisfy those requirements. So we would be looking to approve a task order with More Engineering to complete the work on this study. And again, that task order is included in in the packet, and the cost for this task order would be able to be paid for out of the grant that we do have from the state. And with that, I would entertain any questions.
So a brick grant, is that part of what the Corps of Engineers did over on Old Riverside? That's similar?
No, where we bought out the homes, that was, I believe, a hazard mitigation grant for that. A brick grant is a nationally very sought-after program. There is a lot more people that request their money than get their money, but we do feel that just as with the Raise grant and the railroad, it is worth submitting for in the event that we can get it because of the cost of the lift station. And then the other thing is that's the only way that we can think of that the city would be able to assist in potentially helping these property owners to get purchased. Because right now, as it currently sits, this garage is basically undermined in the northwest corner of it. If you were to drive out to the site, you can see there's basically a fault line or a line of sliding where that parking lot to get into the garage, it starts sloping towards the river. You can see there's damage to the structure with settling. That garage is not going to be salvageable. And also, if you take a look at the northwest corner of this structure right here, the top of the bank has gotten, within probably 10 to 12 feet of the corner of that structure as well. And it continues to erode, much like a lot of the river in town.
I know two of the residents that live in there, and they've had me out a number of times to observe as the sloughing continues year after year, particularly when it comes to the garage. I wouldn't park my car in there.
It's pretty bad damage right now if you were to go out and take a look at it.
Yes, it is. So when you alter the river, about where you had that yellow line, I assume, Mr.
That's a property line, but basically, yes.
So it'd be to the left of there, to the west. So what type of mitigation do you have to do as the river to the north of there?
A couple different things. One is the energy that is discharged from the lift station is strongest right at the location of it. So according to Braun's report and also in discussions with them, after you get a little ways down the river, the energy from the discharge, it dissipates in the river. The other thing that we have going for us is the diversion is going to be completed soon. That is going to control the level of amount of water that can go through our river.
With regard to velocity?
With regards to quantity and velocity, yeah, absolutely. So there will be energy dissipation at the outlet, but we also want to, in this near vicinity, take a look at what it would cause as far as potential degradation. And some of that was covered in the Braun report that's in the packet. So a couple of things that pop into my mind, because obviously changing the natural course of a river is not an easy thing to get permitted. It is something that is likely to take a couple of years if it's agreeable through the Corps. But the other thing is we also wouldn't be filling the existing river up. You would still want, and you wouldn't want stagnant water in there, so you would want to potentially have like a downstream berm that has a pipe that goes through it, a 24 or 36 inch pipe, to still allow flow to go through it, so that way that water doesn't get stagnant. And then also we could take a look at, in the area where we are diverting it, what can we do mechanically to dissipate the energy within the water, so that way we get to more of a steady state condition by the time that it exits that area.
Very good. Any other questions? Anyone? This is an actionable item, Commissioners. Commissioner Olson moves to approve. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Anderson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve project number 9038, bank stabilization. Approve the task order to study a potential Sheyenne River realignment. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hampton.
Thank you.
Item number 6, City Administrator's Report. Call on Mr. Dustin Scott, City Administrator.
Thank you again, Commission President Dardis and Commissioners. So I really only have one topic for tonight, and that is our budget, 2025 budget. And start with Rachel did get our budget book assembled. She took all the financial tables and all the nerdy data and compiled it into, I think, what is a very easy to follow, user-friendly book. It is on our website. It does have our departmental expenditure and revenue detail. So encourage the public to go take a look at that. Reminder that our hearing on the preliminary budget is on September 16th. We, of course, have been over these past few weeks working hard to make some adjustments to our budget, and I am fully confident the work of our department heads that we will be coming forward with a draft final budget without a request for additional mills. Our department heads have found over $500,000 of expenditure reductions, and we are again talking through other options to mitigate the need for any additional mill levy. So I'm very proud of our department heads and their work and working with their staffs to tighten up their budgets. So with that, that's really the only update I have for you. Any questions I can answer?
At $500,000, $560,000. So we thank everybody's for their contributions of scrutinizing their own budget, and then, of course, the leadership of Mr. Scott and the commissioners having discussions. There are I believe that there still are 3 items that the commission has to consider. And, obviously, we do our business here at the table, but if you have some suggestions or to Mr. Scott, I think one of the things is the discussion on the percentage of the COLA. The other discussion is that, again, as a placeholder, I made the motion for 2 mil increase because we still had a deficit at that time of about 503,000, I believe, at the time. That sound right?
It was about 200,000 in the general and a 1.4 in the fire.
Okay, well, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we had moved that down, it was down to 200,000. The point being is do we consider reserves? Do we consider mills in order to address that? And I think Mr. Scott has done a fine job in addressing that, and I'd encourage you to have conversation about that. So how we handle that, those additional fundings of the $1 million plus in fire, the 200,000 and the other, and also the COLA. The placeholder at the present time is 4%, but I know that there's commissioners that have different thoughts on that. So
Very good.
we're going to have to come to a conclusion of how we're going to handle those issues. I encourage you to talk to Mr. Scott, give him any guidance that you can. Anything else for us, Mr. Scott?
Just one
One
item on the, on the budget. Will we be setting the rates for like sanitation at the same time? They'll be blessed, and should we consider including bulky item pickup charges and different things like that? Because we know we're losing money on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Olson. At the present rates that have been submitted by Public Works and Sanitation are in this budget. Those increases are part of the revenue stream for those utility funds.
Okay.
So when we get to the final budget, the way that I would like to administer it as running the meeting is that if there's a line item that you want to pull out specifically, each commissioner, COLA, the rates, if you want to have a discussion about specifically the bulk items and things like that, that could get a little cumbersome, I believe, in the budgetary process, but you could always reserve the right to go back and review that. But it will have a fiduciary fall on what we approve. If we approve the rates as presented.
I think Mr. Anvik still has to have a public hearing on that. I think he just introduced them, and so I think at our next meeting, there's going to be a public hearing on it for a formal, that is what I understood at our last.
Adoption to the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Scott?
Yeah, and just to add to that, thank you, Commissioner Zendel. So September 16th is a hearing on specifically the preliminary budget. We did put a tentative date out there of September 23rd, the following Monday, to look at the draft final. And yes, Mr. Anvik was planning to come before the commission on September 16th for action on utility rates, and that could be delayed and brought forward in tandem with the final budget. But that was, the tentative plan anyway was to have action on the utility rates on the 16th, which again is the day of the preliminary budget hearing. The 23rd, and then the following meeting in October will be the final budget. So,
The point I was trying to make is that if you as a commissioner, whether it's the COLA, the rates, or whatever, continue to have that dialogue with Mr. Scott so he knows the scenarios and then, can do the forecasting of the effect that it has on the budget. So because we're on a short timeline, as we bring this stuff forward, we don't have to say, well, gosh, I got to get back to you in 3 days. That's why I encourage you as commissioners to have very open dialogue with Mr. Scott so he can plug and paste, so to speak, if there's some considerations that you feel very strongly about. Anything else? Mr. Jorgensen?
Right after we changed the garbage rates in July, Commissioner Anderson and I met with Sanitation and Matt Anvig, and we were gonna try to let a historical keep track and then not do a knee-jerk reaction right away, but get a historical after another holiday when people were using more trash and see where they were at. And we'd kind of loosely scheduled a meeting. We didn't even schedule it, we just said we'd reassess it in October. So like the bulk storage and all that, it's on our radar. We will be addressing it in October. Another deal, I will not be here for the first meeting in October.
All right, thank you. Anything else for us, Mr. Scott?
No.
Questions, anybody from the commission? Thank you, Mr. Scott.
thank you.
Correspondence, anything for us?
No, sir.
I want to commend staff, all that were involved in this morning. We had a cybersecurity seminar with all the things that are happening across the world and even locally here. That was well done, and appreciate everybody that did attend, that have a responsibility in that area. It was well done, just for your information. Does any commissioner have any non-agenda item you'd like to bring up at this time? Okay. Does any department head have anything that you'd like to bring up at this time? All right. Commissioner Olson,
Move to adjourn.
Commissioner Zundell,
I second.
we're adjourned. Thank you.
I should have went with Rory.